The twin suns of Serif 9 had already dropped below the western ridge, leaving Roger Reeves' orchard in a pale orange haze. The air was still, thick with the sweet tongue of ripening fruit and the damp musk of irrigated soil. Roger walked the perimeter with the same steady cadence he had once used to patrol hostile ridgelines in the frontier corps. His broad shoulders moved beneath a faded work shirt, his boots sinking slightly in the damp earth. He checked valves, tapped lines, and listened for leaks, each motion as deliberate as the snap of a rifle's bolt. Farming wasn't glorious, but it gave him something war never had: predictability. He was halfway down the northern row when a flicker of motion caught his eye. A branch swayed, though no wind moved. His hand shifted from the basket at his hip to the knife on his belt. Habit, not fear. He stepped past a trunk, eyes narrowing. She was there, crouched low at the stone wall, like a cornered animal, arms wrapped around a clutch of fruit. Her skin was faintly green, faintly luminous even in the dusk, her long crimson hair a tangle of dust and leaves. What had once been ceremonial silks hung in tatters, knotted into strips that barely covered her. Trembling frame. She glared at him, amber eyes sharp despite her ragged state. When she tried to run, her bare feet slipped on wet soil. The fruit tumbled from her grasp, bruising against the ground. She collapsed forward, scraping her palms raw. For a heartbeat, she stayed there, breathing hard, then raised her hands high in surrender. Her voice cracked like glass, raw from thirst. "Spare me," she rasped. "I'll work your fields by day, warm your bed by night." Roger froze, the words slamming into him with all the force of a battlefield memory. Instinct screamed to drive her off, protect the orchard. Another part deeper, quieter, saw the straightness of her back, even as she shook, saw the pride that clung to her despite hunger. She was not begging, not really. She was bargaining with the only coin she thought she had left. His fingers brushed the knife's hilt, but he didn't draw. He didn't need to. He studied her a moment longer. She was near collapse, but still. Upright, brittle, but unbroken. That tugged at him more than any plea could. "Stand up," he said, voice low, controlled. She rose slowly, clutching at her rags to keep them from slipping. Her chin lifted with defiance, though her knees wobbled beneath her. For an instant, her eyes flicked past him, scanning the orchard as if expecting others to come. But they were alone. "Name?" he asked. "Carrie." The word came clear, though. Her lips were cracked. Roger reached for his belt, not for the knife, but for the canteen. He extended it toward her. She hesitated, then seized it with both hands. Water spilled down her chin, soaking the torn silk at her chest, but she drank until the canteen was empty, coughing as if afraid it would be taken away. That was no trick. That was need. "Come," Roger said, jerking his head toward the farmhouse. She clutched the blanket he handed her, as if it were proof she had not been turned away. Her steps dragged in the dirt, but she never asked him to slow. Inside, the small kitchen smelled of stew left on low heat. Roger ladled it into 2 bowls and set one in front of her. She stared at it a long moment before eating fast at first, sharp, until the bowl was empty. She wiped the rim with her thumb, as though afraid to waste even a drop. When she finally looked up, her eyes held a wary question. Roger answered before she could speak. "You'll stay on the porch tonight. Tomorrow you work, not as a bargain, just work for food. That's the deal." Confusion flickered across her face, breaking through pride. She had expected him to take the offer, to claim what desperation had put on the table. Instead, he had set it aside. "You turned me down," she whispered. "I don't need that," Roger said. His gaze was steady. "I need someone who won't waste food, someone who won't let rot spread in my trees." You patched a cracked limb before you stole. That tells me enough. Her eyes widened. He had noticed the resin on her hands. A flicker of relief crossed her face, gone as quickly as it came. And if the neighbors see? She asked softly. They can look, he replied, tone final. I don't answer to them. For the first time, she lowered her eyes. She pulled the blanket tight around her shoulders and stepped toward the porch. Roger watched her curl against the boards, her breathing evening out as exhaustion claimed her. He remained at the screen door, arms crossed, gaze on the orchard. He told himself this was temporary one stray, given shelter for the night. But as the stars rose over Serif 9 and her quiet breathing filled the silence, he knew it would not. And at dawn, the suns rose hard and early on Serif 9, their twin light pressing gold through the orchard rows before the air had cooled from the night. Roger was already awake, boots laced, shirt tucked, knife at his belt. He stepped out with the same discipline that had carried him through campaigns, expecting the porch to be empty, expecting the woman to have fled into the night with her pride and the blanket. But she was there. Carrie sat on the step, knees drawn, close, hair tangled from sleep. The blanket was folded into a neat square beside her, as if she were returning something borrowed. She didn't fidget, didn't beg. She just waited, amber eyes fixed on him, steady despite the bruised hollows. Beneath them, she could have run, he thought. She hadn't. That meant something. Roger set a pair of worn gloves on the step in front of her. You'll need these. Her fingers closed around them slowly, testing the leather. Too big, the seams dangling past her knuckles, but she flexed her hands and slipped them on. Work starts now, he said. She followed him down the rows, her steps soundless except for the crunch of damp soil under borrowed boots. Roger didn't slow, didn't explain the way. He wanted to see if she would keep up. She did. Silent, alert, like someone used to following orders. At the fourth row, he stopped. The patched limb she had smeared with resin still held, though the weight above it sagged heavy with fruit. He said nothing. He only watched Carrie stepped forward without instruction, pressing her palm against the dried resin, testing the seam. It held, she said, voice steadier in daylight. Not bad, Roger answered. He handed her the cutters. Trim above. The weight will split again if we don't. She looked at the tool, then at him, almost as if asking permission. He tilted his head once. She climbed onto the brace, reached high, and cut clean. Bark snapped, the branch falling in a crisp arc to the ground. She swayed but steadied herself, her hands confident despite her exhaustion. Roger narrowed his eyes. You've done this before. Carrie climbed down, brushed dirt from her knees. My husband and I had an orchard. Before. Her jaw tightened on the word. She dropped the branch on the pile, not looking at him. And now? Roger pressed her. Lips thinned, buried months ago. She said it flat, without tremor, though her shoulders betrayed the strain. Roger didn't push. He knew that voice, the clipped edge of someone who had lost too much to keep telling the story. Instead, he led her deeper into the rows. She matched his pace without complaint, carrying crates heavier than her frame should allow. Sweat streaked. The dust on her skin, but she never asked for rest. By noon, both of them were streaked with dirt and heat. The rags clung to her frame, torn further at the seams. She ignored it, hauling crates with the stubborn drive of a soldier proving she belonged. Roger recognized the rhythm, the same desperate edge he had seen in recruits who feared being cast aside. Inside, he set bowls on the table. She lingered in the doorway, hands clasped as though she hadn't earned the seat. He pulled a chair out with one hand, sat in the other, and gestured with his chin. Eat. She lowered herself slowly, every motion taut with caution. This time. She ate slower, tasting instead of devouring. Her gaze moved constantly shelves, jars, the orderly rows of tools. Finally, her eyes cut back to him. "Why didn't you take what I offered?" she asked. Voice low. Roger set his spoon down. His gaze stayed level. "Because I don't bargain with people. I want someone who knows what they're worth." Her brow furrowed, as though she couldn't tell if it was insult or honor. "Most men wouldn't refuse." "I'm not most men." Silence stretched. Then softer, almost unwilling, she said, "And if I have nothing else to give?" Roger leaned back in his chair. "Then you work, you eat, you sleep safe. That's enough." She blinked, as if tasting the words, unsure if they were real. He didn't flinch. He didn't soften. He only let the truth stand between them. Later, when the shadows grew long, Roger stepped out to check the pump. Carrie followed without needing to be told. She rolled her sleeves and bent over the basin, scrubbing sap and dirt from her arms. The water ran green where it hit the ground. Her shoulders tensed when she felt his eyes on her. "If the neighbors see me here," she said, quiet, "they'll think I'm for sale." "They'll think what they want," Roger replied, tone flat. "I don't live by their mouths." That made her pause. A faint breath left her, like she'd been holding it since the orchard. He went inside, pulled a clean shirt from the drawer, and laid it across the rail. "Take it. What's left of those rags won't last a week." Carrie stared at the shirt, then at him. Slowly, she pulled it over her head. The fabric hung loose, but it covered her fully. She touched the hem once, almost reverent, like she had forgotten what it felt like to wear something whole. That night, she curled on the porch again. Roger sat by the door, listening to her breathing slow. The fields whispered in the dark, steady as always, but his solitude no longer felt the same. He told himself it was temporary, but a part of him already knew. When morning came, she would still be here, and everything would be different. The morning haze clung low to the rose, beads of dew glistening on every leaf. Roger hitched the truck, while Carrie loaded crates with a practiced rhythm that surprised him. She didn't ask what came next. She simply fell into step as though she'd done it all her life. The gloves still sagged loose on her fingers, the borrowed shirt hanging open at the collar, but her chin was up, her back straight. The ride into Sarai's crossroads was quiet. The road bumped over stones. The cab cramped enough that her thigh pressed against his. She shifted once, then stilled, choosing not to pretend there was space where there wasn't. Roger kept his eyes on the horizon, but he felt her presence. Beside him, like a pulse, the market was already awake by the time they rolled in. Dust curled with every cart. Merchants barked over prices. Children darted between stalls, and men leaned against posts, chewing stalks of dry grain. As soon as Carrie stepped down from the truck, whispers rippled. Crimson hair marked her out like a flare. The glances carried weight. Curiosity, suspicion, judgment. Roger ignored them. He hauled the first crate to the scale himself, setting it. Down with the solid thump of fruit stacked tight. "Weigh," he said flatly. The clerk scribbled numbers onto the ledger, lips moving silently as he tallied. Roger gestured to Carrie. 10%, hers. The man's pencil froze. His eyes cut to Carrie, then back to Roger, disbelief flickering. "She registered?" he asked. "She works," Roger replied. "She gets paid." The hesitation stretched. The clerk's gaze slid toward the cluster of men watching from the post. The weight of silence thickened, unspoken questions pressing into the dust between them. Carrie's shoulders tightened, her fingers twitching toward the hem of the borrowed shirt. She stood tall, but Roger saw the tremor in her jaw, the trace of dread that this moment would collapse the fragile dignity she had begun to reclaim. "Write it," Roger said, voice low but edged with steel. The clerk licked his pencil, split the tally, and scribbled the second slip. He shoved it across the counter without meeting Carrie's eyes. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, but when her fingers closed, they held fast. She unfolded it once, read the sum, and folded it again with careful precision. She slipped it into the belt at her waist as though it were armor. The men at the post said nothing. They watched, their stares thick with implication, but none spoke. The work of weighing went on, crate after crate, numbers scratched into the ledger, dust swirling dot by. The time the last crate was tallied, the sun was burning hot above the stalls. Roger turned to Kari. Her face was flushed, not from heat, but from something deeper, an unsteady pride that pulled her chin higher. On the ride back, she stared out the window, slip still tucked tight at her waist. The road rattled beneath them, wheels thumping over stone. Finally, her voice came, soft and uneven. "That was the first thing in months with my name on it." Roger didn't glance at her. His eyes stayed on the horizon. "Get used to it." For a long while, neither spoke. The orchard rose out of the dust in the distance, rose glinting with afternoon light. Roger felt her watching him from the corner of her eye, but when he turned, she had already looked away, folding her arms across her chest as though guarding. The slip inside her belt dug at the house. She carried her own crate inside without waiting for him. Her steps were lighter, though she tried to mask it. The air inside smelled different, already stew thick with herbs she'd hung by the window, the faint trace of soap from her wash at the pump. She set the crate down, then turned. "If I'm to stay, I need to contribute more than hands." She said. "You already are," Roger replied. She shook her head, crimson hair falling across her cheek. "Your life was ordered. You had your rows, your shelves, your silence. I've broken that. Let me balance it." "How?" She hesitated, then drew a folded strip of cloth from the small bundle she had kept since the night he caught her. "Embroidered. Ceremonial untorn, unlike the rest." She laid it across the table. "This was the only piece I didn't cut to rags. I kept it because it meant something. Now it should mean something here." Roger studied the cloth. It wasn't tools. It wasn't food. But her eyes were steady, her hands firm as she pushed it toward him. "That won't fix a pump or prune a tree," he said. "No," Carrie answered, "but it marks a home. Hang it, and it says I'm not passing through." The silence stretched. Then Roger took a nail from the drawer, hammered it above the door, and hung the strip where it caught the light. When the fabric settled, so did something in her shoulders, a weight easing at last. That night, they ate on the step. Firelight flickered over her face, drawing silver from her eyes. She didn't curl away, didn't sit apart. When she spoke, her voice carried steady across the crackle of flames. "You said I'll work for food and sleep safe. But I need you to know something." Roger didn't answer, only watched her in the light. "I didn't stay here because it was convenient. I stayed because you told me no when I was at my lowest, and made it sound like dignity, not rejection." Roger felt the words hit harder than any storm. He didn't let it show. He only leaned back, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the orchard shadows. "Good," he said at last. "Keep it." She looked at him a moment longer, then faced the fire again. And for the first time, she did not look like a stranger on his land. She looked like someone who might belong. The heat of the twin suns bled across the orchard by late afternoon, turning the air thick and heavy. Roger worked with his shirt clinging to his back, loppers flashing as he trimmed limbs. Carrie moved alongside him, gloves dark with sap, hair bound in a rough braid that swung against her shoulders. She no longer asked what to do. She simply watched, learned, and then mirrored his movements with precision that spoke of training buried beneath hunger and loss. When the crates were stacked and the nets hung to dry, She lingered by the 5th tree in the 2nd line. Her hand traced the bark where a knot bulged crookedly, the remnant of a graft that had failed years ago. She pressed her thumb into the seam, head tilted in assessment. "This graft was botched," she said. "The split's too shallow. Whoever did it didn't set the cutting deep enough." Roger glanced over. Inherited mistake. Been meaning to cut it out. Her lips pressed thin. Instead of stepping back, she reached into the tattered wrap at her waist. From a hidden pocket, she drew a flat packet wrapped in oilcloth, sealed, tight with wax. She knelt in the dirt, careful, reverent, and peeled it open. Inside lay a strip of cuttings, pale green, still alive. Roger stilled. "What's that?" "Heritage stock," she said. Her voice was low, but steady. "Sweet under low light, resilient in heat. I carried them from my husband's orchard. Kept them against my skin so they wouldn't spoil." Her thumb brushed the wax, her face unreadable. "I saved them for a place where they would matter." Roger's chest tightened. She had crossed hunger, ruin, and exile with something of real value tucked to her ribs, something she could have sold in the market for coin enough to survive. She hadn't. She had waited for land, for trust, for this. "Why show me now?" he asked. Her amber eyes lifted to his. "Because you didn't take what I offered. You gave me work. A name on a slip, a place to sit." Her jaw flexed. "That was enough to make me believe these belong in your soil." The words pressed into him like weight. Roger set his loppers aside, crouched, and studied the cuttings. "We do it at dusk," he said. "Cooler. The grafts take better." Carrie nodded once. She sealed the cuttings again with slow, careful fingers, then tucked them back into the folds of her wrap. Her hands trembled just faintly when she pressed the packet flat against her skin. Evening came, the air softening, shadows stretching long across the rows. Roger brought knives, strips of grafting tape, a lantern. Carrie followed, carrying the packet as if it were holy. Together they cut the failing limb clean, Roger's hand steady on the blade. Carrie split the bark with a small incision, slid the new cutting into living wood, sealed the seam with tape. Her movements were precise, ritualistic. They repeated the steps tree by tree until the packet was empty. The final cutting went into the tree she had patched with resin on her first night. Carrie pressed the tape firm, her thumb lingering. She bent her head and whispered, not prayer but statement. "Now you carry him forward." Roger stood back, lantern glow catching on bark slick with sap. For the first time in years, the orchard looked different, not just maintained, but renewed. On the porch, he fetched a small trunk from under the bench. Inside were spare shirts, plain trousers, an old belt. He held the belt out to her. "You keep tying that wrap in ways that fail on ladders. Take this." She buckled it tight, the leather cinching the silks firm at her waist. She raised her arms, testing it. The fabric stayed put. She glanced up, caught him watching. This time she didn't look away. "Your room," Roger said. He led her down the hall to the spare space cot, narrow dresser, one window that opened toward the orchard. On the sill lay a small key. "What's this for?" she asked, picking it up. "Front door," he said. "If you leave early for market. If I come back late, you trust me with the house?" "I'm trusting you with the trees," Roger answered. "The house costs less." Her lips curved, not soft, but alive. She slipped the key into her belt beside the folded slip from the market. 2 pieces of proof she hadn't been discarded. That night, firelight flickered on the porch. Carrie sat close, knees drawn, blanket forgotten. She spoke of the sickness that had gutted her commune, of neighbors who took land with deeds and silence, not chains. She told it without begging, each word clipped to bone. Roger listened, asked only the questions that served the work. When the fire dropped to coals, she looked at him across the glow. "You asked why I stayed," she said. "The truth is I stayed because you said no when I had nothing left. And you made it sound like I still had dignity." The words struck harder than any storm. Roger kept his face still, eyes fixed on the coals. "Good," he said. "Keep it." Carrie stood, her shadow stretched long across the boards. At the door to her room she turned once more. "I'll ask when I'm ready." Roger nodded. "I heard you." She closed the door halfway, not shut, not wide open. A mark of choice. Roger leaned back in his chair, arms folded. For years, the house had been silent, bare. Tonight it was different, alive with someone else's presence. And as he listened to her quiet movements down the hall, he realized he no longer minded the change. The storm came before dawn. Roger woke to the rattle of rain hammering the tin roof, shutters banging in the wind. He swung out of bed, boots on, shirt half buttoned, knife at his belt, more out of instinct than need. The orchard roared with noise, branches thrashing under. Sheets of water, the soil already loosening to mud. He shoved the door open, stepping into the gale. Carrie was there, barefoot in the rain, hair unbound and plastered to her cheeks. She dragged 2 crates toward the trellis without waiting for him. The borrowed belt cinched her silks tight, the shirt clinging to her skin. She shouted over the storm, voice sharp, urgent. "If we don't brace the trellis, you'll lose half the fruit." He should have sent her back inside, should have kept her from the danger of wind-snapped limbs and flying debris. Instead, he caught the rope she threw and braced his weight against the trellis frame. Together they pulled, knots biting deep into their palms. Rain streaked down their arms, water streaming off the brim of Roger's hat. For an hour they fought, side by side, rain blinding, mud sucking at their boots, ropes straining under weight. Carrie's hands shook but didn't fail, her jaw tight with effort. Roger tightened beams, planted braces, his strength holding where hers strained. She kept pace anyway, rope after rope, knot after knot. Neither wasted words. The storm demanded everything. When it finally broke, they stood soaked to the bone, mud streaking their legs, the trellis holding against the wind. Carrie leaned against a post, chest heaving, silks plastered to her skin. Roger looked once, long enough to feel heat even through the cold rain, then turned away to tighten the last rope knot inside. The house smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. Roger lit the stove, chopping vegetables with steady hands. Carrie stripped the shirt at the pump, wrung it out, and draped it over the chair. She pulled a blanket around herself, drops still sliding from her hair, but her eyes stayed on him. "You fight storms the same way you fight me," she said, voice low, silent, relentless. Roger didn't look up. "I fight to win, not to break." She stepped closer, bare feet whispering against the boards. "And if I want to be broken?" His knife paused over the board. For a long moment, only the rain filled the silence. He set the blade down carefully, every motion deliberate. "Then you're asking the wrong man." Her mouth curved, something between a smirk and a frown, but she said nothing more. She settled into the chair by the fire, blanket slipping from. One shoulder, eyes still burning into him. Steam from the pot drifted between them, mingling with smoke and damp earth. They ate in silence, bowls warming their hands, storm still pounding faintly outside. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but it carried more weight. "My husband built our trellis too thin. I told him, but he didn't listen. When the storm came, it fell. We lost a season. A week later, he was gone from the sickness." Her throat tightened. "I always thought, if we'd had the food, maybe." Roger cut her off gently. You did what you could. You're still here. That's proof enough. Her eyes lifted, sharp, demanding. And you? You left the Corps. But you still march like you're answering to someone. Who do you answer to now? He held her gaze, jaw set. No one, that's the point. Maybe that's the problem, Carrie said. She leaned forward, firelight catching silver in her amber eyes. No one should live without answering to someone. Her words hit harder than the wind had. Roger turned away, stared out the rain-streaked window at the orchard glistening in stormlight. Silence pressed close. Then he felt her presence behind him, the light touch of her hand on his arm. Testing, waiting. He didn't pull away. She stepped nearer, blanket sliding low. Her breath warmed his shoulder when she whispered, "You turned me down the first. Night, you were right. But if I ask now, if I choose, will you still refuse?" Roger turned slowly, close enough to see the hunger in her eyes, not for food, but for being wanted without shame. His voice was steady. "I don't refuse what's real. But if you ask, there's no taking it back." Her lips parted, breath sharp. For a long heartbeat, neither moved. Then she closed the space. The kiss was fierce, stripped of bargaining, full of all the restraint they had carried since the orchard. His hands gripped her waist, anchoring her like he'd anchored the trellis. Her fingers pressed into his shoulders, holding as if the storm had followed them inside. When they broke apart, her forehead rested against his. Her whisper was ragged. "Then don't make me ask again." Roger's answer was simple, quiet, final. "I won't." That night, the cot in the spare room stayed empty. The half-open door said more than words. Roger lay with her beside him, her body warm against his. For the first time in years, sleep came not as escape, but as something earned. Outside, the orchard dripped with rain. Inside, something stronger had taken root. Dawn rose clear after the storm, the orchard glistening as if every leaf had been polished by the night. Roger stood on the porch, coffee steaming in his hand, boots damp from mud tracked in earlier. The trellis still held, ropes taut where he and Carrie had braced them together. He had seen campaigns crumble under less. Yet here it was, standing, alive. Behind him came the sound of soft footsteps. Carrie emerged from the hall, not wrapped in rags anymore, but in his shirt, belted at the waist, her crimson hair braided back in a loose knot. She carried herself differently. Now, not the desperate thief he'd caught crouched by his wall, but someone with claim, someone who had chosen to stay. She stepped beside him, bare feet firm on the boards, eyes scanning the rows as if she, too, was measuring what had survived. "It held," she said quietly. "It did," Roger replied. His voice was rough, not from doubt, but from the weight of everything unspoken between them. They worked the morning together without words. She checked the graphs, careful fingers pressing tape, reading the seams like a healer reading scars. Roger hauled crates, set them for drying, watched her in silence when she thought he wasn't looking. She caught him once and didn't flinch. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't ask permission. At midday, he hitched the truck. "We take the first pick to the market," he said. Carrie straightened, wiping dirt from her palms. Her jaw tightened. "In front of them?" "In front of them," Roger said. His tone carried no debate. "You said you don't want charity. Best way to make it clear is at the scale." The road rattled beneath them, sun sharp overhead. The cab was cramped again, her thigh brushing his, but this time she didn't shift away. Dust rose in a pale cloud behind the truck as they drove toward Sarai's crossroads. The market was louder than before, hawkers shouting, carts jostling, men leaning idle against posts. Roger carried the first crate himself, set it heavy on. The scale. The clerk scribbled the weight, but his eyes flicked at Carrie, hesitant, Roger's voice cut through the noise. 10%, hers. The clerk paused, lips working, but Roger's stare didn't waver. Slowly, the man split the tally and slid a slip across the counter. Carrie took it with steady fingers this time. No tremor, no hesitation. She folded it into her belt and looked up, daring anyone to speak. None did. The whispers hung in the air, but no challenge came. On the drive back, Carrie leaned against the window, slip tucked safe. "I thought I'd feel shame," she admitted, voice low. Standing there, being watched, Roger kept his eyes on the road, and instead I felt steady. She turned, studied him. Her eyes warmed despite the sharp set of her jaw. "Because of you." "No," he corrected, flat but certain. "Because of you." The house smelled different when they returned, herbs drying, broth simmering with spice he hadn't thought to add. Carrie moved through the kitchen as if she'd always belonged, jars lined neat, hands sure. They ate at the table, knees brushing. The silence between them no longer heavy but familiar. After dinner, they stepped outside into the orchard. The suns hung low, sky painted red and gold, fruit glowing faintly under the fading light. Carrie climbed a ladder, her body lit in fire stripes, reaching for a high branch. Roger steadied the base, his hand brushing the rung. On impulse, he leaned forward and kissed her shoulder where the collar hung open. She froze a heartbeat, then looked down at him. No fear, no doubt, only choice. Later, on the porch, Roger brought out a small box. Inside lay a ring he had fashioned from an old ladder rung sand smooth, oiled, plain, but strong. He held it out. "I don't do ceremonies," he said quietly, "but I do commitments." Carrie's breath caught. She took the ring, slid it onto her finger. It fit. She laughed once, sharp and genuine, then reached into her bundle and drew a strip torn from the silks she had first worn. She tied it around his wrist, not firm. Then, "This is ours," she said. The moment was simple but final. The orchard, the house, the partnership. Not bargain, not pity. A vow. That night, she didn't close her door halfway. She left it wide open. Roger followed her inside without hesitation. There were no questions left, no bargains. Only two people choosing, fully, without weight from the past. When morning came, the orchard stretched wide and alive under the suns. And Roger no longer saw himself as a man, alone on his land. He saw a partner, crimson-haired and steady, walking beside him through the rows. Together, the festival came with the turning of the suns, when the air thinned just enough for the market at Sarai's crossroads to swell with music and trade. Carts lined the square, draped in colored cloth. Drums thudded somewhere near the grain scales. Voices rose in bartered arguments, and the scent of spiced bread mixed with oil smoke Roger drove the truck through the crowd with his usual silence. Crates stacked tight in the back. Carrie sat upright beside him, hair bound in a crimson braid, the plain ring he had given her glinting in the light. She didn't hide in his shirt anymore. She had stitched it to fit, worn the belt firm at her waist, and carried herself with the kind of defiance that drew every eye without asking for it. Whispers followed them the moment they stepped down. Neighbors watched from shaded stalls, some with curiosity, some with that quiet, cutting judgment Roger had long since stopped answering to. But Carrie didn't waver. She lifted her chin, amber eyes sharp as knives, and carried the first crate. Herself to the scales. The clerk blinked, startled, but Roger's voice left no space for debate. "Weigh it. Split it. 10% hers." The man scribbled, hands stiff. Carrie took the slip without hesitation, folded it, and tucked it into her belt. Around them, the air rippled with the silence of those who wanted to whisper, but found no words. And then it came, the reveal. The first crate cracked open. Fruit lifted to be inspected, tested, tasted. The merchant's knife sliced clean through. The skin and the flesh inside gleamed with a faint luminescence, sweet and sharp under the suns. Murmurs turned to gasps. One man choked on his bite, sputtering. This stock was gone, lost in the blight. Carrie stepped forward before Roger could speak, her voice ringing steady across the square. It wasn't gone. My family kept the grafts. When sickness took our commune, I carried them. She drew from her belt the small packet of oilcloth, opened it to show the wax-sealed scraps she had saved until Roger's orchard became their ground. I didn't sell them. I didn't trade them for shelter. I waited for a place where they would matter. The crowd stirred, voices rising, some in awe, some in envy. A man at the back spat into the dust. So you carried treasure while others starved. Carrie's gaze didn't waver. I carried hope, and I shared it where I was giving dignity, not charity. She turned her head, eyes finding Roger. Here. The square went quiet. The clerk, caught between custom and truth, wrote the weight into the ledger, then pushed the tally forward with a hand that trembled. Carrie pressed her palm against the paper, claim made in front of every whisperer. Roger didn't smile, didn't nod. He only stood beside her, presence like a wall, letting her own voice carry. On the drive back, dust curling behind the truck, Carrie leaned against the seat, a slip tucked tight in her belt, the ring glinting on her finger. They saw me today, she said softly, not as a thief, not as charity, as someone who brought something back. Roger kept his eyes on the road. That's what you are. Back at the orchard, the suns were sinking low, sky burning red. Over the rows. They unloaded the crates, the fruit stacked neat against the wall, the smell sharp and sweet. Carrie paused at the threshold, her ceremonial cloth still hanging above the door, stirring faintly in the breeze. This was my husband's once, she said, fingers brushing the edge of the packet before tucking it away. Now it's ours. The orchard, the grafts, the work. Roger set his hand over hers, calloused and steady. Ours. That night, they ate in the glow of the fire pit, shoulders touching, no space left between them. She didn't speak of bargains, didn't speak of survival. She leaned into him as if the orchard itself had rooted them together. And when the suns rose again over Serif 9, painting the rose gold, two figures walked side by side through the orchard, not a soldier and a widow bound by desperation, but partners. The land was theirs, the work theirs, the future theirs. What had begun with stolen fruit and a desperate bargain ended in something stronger. Not survival, belonging, not shame. Vows. The orchard of Serif 9 was no longer his alone. It was theirs proof that even in a world built on whispers and storms, dignity could grow back, branch by branch, if two people chose to plant it together.